My name is Danielle Carter. I'm 32, a senior interior architect living in Charlotte, North Carolina. I design spaces for a living, clean lines, functional beauty, every element purposeful. I see the world in balance and tension. What I never expected was that the most dangerous imbalance in my life would be inside my own home. I used to believe my life was stable. I had worked hard, climbed steadily through the ranks of my firm, and built a name for myself in the regional architecture world. My designs had recently been featured in Southern Modern magazine. My calendar was filled with project launches, client walkthroughs, and panel speaking invites. To the outside world, it looked like I had it all. And to be honest, I thought so too. My husband, Ethan Carter, seemed like the perfect match. Level-headed, intelligent, methodical, a senior financial analyst at a high-profile investment firm downtown. He was the kind of man who triple-checked our taxes, had a password manager for every account, and insisted on monthly budget check-ins. For 3 years, I appreciated his structure. His calmness balanced my chaos, or so I thought. But calm can hide rot. That Sunday morning, we were at my sister-in-law's house, Valerie Langston, Ethan's older sister. She lived in a multi-million-dollar property in Myers Park, where every house looked like it came out of a luxury magazine. Valerie was the vice president of marketing at Veritas Edge, a ruthless tech startup known for acquiring and gutting local brands. She thrived on pressure and perfection, and she didn't try to hide her ambition. Brunch at her place was a monthly performance, the silver flatware gleaming, the table set like an art installation, and the conversation always skating on a thin layer of judgment. I already felt uneasy walking into her home that day. Something was off. Ethan was quiet, more than usual. He smiled when we arrived, but it was stiff, too measured. We all sat at her glass dining table. I adjusted my linen napkin and forced myself to match the surface-level cheeriness that floated through the room. Valerie complimented the quiche she didn't eat. Ethan mentioned a new investment fund. I nodded, pretending to listen, and then he placed the coffee cup in front of me. It was matte black, minimalist, my aesthetic. I recognized it as one of our own mugs from our kitchen. That alone made my skin prickle. "Here," Ethan said softly. "I made this just for you." He was smiling, but there was no warmth in his eyes. They were distant, calculating. I blinked. "You made this?" He nodded. "French press, Ethiopian roast. Thought I'd surprise you." That stopped me. Ethan never made coffee. I mean, never. That was my ritual. He didn't even like the smell. He was more of a green smoothie kind of guy. My radar, already sensitive, started beeping. Before I could answer, Valerie smirked from across the table. "Ethan's been experimenting," she said, stirring her own cup. "He's obsessed with pour-over methods now, says it helps him bond with you." She tilted her head. Her tone was syrupy sweet, but her eyes were full of knives. I managed a small laugh. "Is that so?" The steam rose from the cup, curling into my face. That's when I noticed the smell. It was wrong. Not burnt. Not overly strong, but metallic, sharp, like blood and water. My stomach turned. I set the cup down carefully, pretending to be absorbed in a text message. "That's intense," I said, glancing at Ethan. He shrugged. "It's the roast, supposed to have earthy notes." Earthy? This didn't smell like earth. It smelled like a warning. I looked across the table. Valerie's cup sat untouched. Not even a sip. She was watching me, and in that moment, everything clicked. The tea I had last month at her house, chamomile with lemon. I ended up in urgent care the next day, dizzy and sweating through my sheets. The cupcakes Ethan brought home 2 weeks ago. I vomited so hard I couldn't make my Monday meeting. My boss had started asking questions. Was I okay? Was I overworked? I hadn't been able to answer, but now I had a terrifying suspicion. And Valerie, her expression now, that wasn't concern. That was curiosity, like she was waiting for a reaction. I glanced at Ethan again. He looked so calm, too calm. The corners of his mouth still curled in that fake smile. I needed out. I stood abruptly. "Shoot. I forgot I have a client call in 10 minutes. Valerie, do you mind if I use your upstairs office?" She waved me off with a flick of her hand. "Of course, just don't peek at my launch pitch." I walked past her, then stopped. "Oh, sorry, I dropped my napkin." I bent down. In one smooth motion, I swapped our cups. Mine, still full, still steaming, was now at her place setting. Hers came with me. No one noticed. I walked calmly up the stairs. My hands were shaking, my breath shallow. Inside her office, I closed the door halfway, just enough to leave a sliver of visibility to the table below. And I waited. 1 minute passed, 2, then Valerie lifted the cup. She sipped, and immediately her smile faltered. She blinked, set the cup down slowly, rubbed her temples. Ethan looked up. His expression stiffened. "You okay?" Valerie shook her head slightly. "I feel strange." She reached for the edge of the table. Her hand trembled. "What do you mean, strange?" Ethan asked. Her face paled. "Like dizzy. My chest feels tight." I could see the panic rise in Ethan's posture. He stood up so fast his chair skidded behind him. "Val, that wasn't—" He stopped mid-sentence. Realization slapped him across the face. Valerie's eyes widened. "What did you say?" He looked sick. "That wasn't your cup." She tried to stand but stumbled. "What the hell was in that coffee, Ethan?" He stammered. "It was just something mild. She's been working nonstop. I thought—" "You thought drugging me was a solution?" Valerie screamed, her voice breaking. She began convulsing. Her body went limp against the table. Ethan panicked. "Call an ambulance." "I already did," I said, stepping out of the shadows at the top of the stairs. My phone was in my hand, camera still recording. He looked up, horror spreading across his face. Valerie tried to speak, but her words were slurred. You switched." I nodded. Ethan froze, caught between running to his sister and trying to explain. "Danielle, wait!" But I didn't wait. I had seen enough. The ambulance arrived faster than I expected. The wail of sirens cut through the quiet Sunday air, followed by a flurry of footsteps as paramedics burst into the house. Valerie was still conscious, barely. Her eyes fluttered. Her lips moved, but the words were tangled and slurred. Her body trembled as if she were caught between two worlds, one of reason and one of ruin. Ethan hovered uselessly over her, his hands shaking. The mask had shattered. The poised analyst who always had the answers now looked like a panicked child. I stood at the top of the stairs, my phone still recording, heart pounding, but voice steady. "She drank something that was meant for me," I said clearly to the lead EMT. "You need to run a toxicology panel immediately." "What was in it?" the paramedic asked. "I don't know," I said, eyes on Ethan, "but he does." They loaded Valerie onto the stretcher, inserting IV lines, placing a mask over her face. She whimpered. Her eyes rolled back, her fingers curled involuntarily. One of the medics radioed ahead for a crash response team. As they pushed her out the door, Ethan tried to follow, but I blocked his path. "You're not going anywhere," I said coldly. Danielle, I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said, voice cracking. "It was supposed to be harmless, just mild." "Mild?" I snapped. "Like the tea that sent me to the ER last month? Or the cupcakes that had me throwing up for 2 days? Or the time I passed out in my office and the doctors couldn't figure out why?" He paled. I turned to one of the officers who had arrived with the medics. "I have video evidence. I also have footage from my home. You'll want to see all of it." "Ma'am, we'll need to take a formal statement at the hospital," the officer said. "Gladly," I replied, "but not before I call my lawyer." At Charlotte General Hospital, the emergency room was chaos. Valerie had been taken straight to toxicology. I sat in a small glass-walled consultation room with 2 officers and a hospital administrator. A nurse brought me coffee. I didn't touch it. 15 minutes later, a woman in a charcoal blazer stepped inside. She carried herself like someone who didn't ask twice. "Danielle Carter?" she said. I nodded. "Detective Alyssa Monroe, CMPD. I specialize in domestic violence, including chemical abuse cases. And yes," she added before I asked, "this qualifies." She took a seat across from me and opened a slim leather notebook. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." I took a deep breath and began. I told her about the tea, the cupcakes, the strange sleep episodes, the incident at the Christmas party where I passed out mid-sentence. The fact that Valerie always seemed to have a drink or a dish in my hand, unrequested but lovingly presented. That Ethan had started hovering over my meals, offering smoothies or home-brewed drinks he'd never touched before. Then I pulled out my phone. "This was taken from the top of the stairs this morning," I said, handing it to her. She watched as Ethan's voice played, "Val, that wasn't your cup." And Valerie, mid-shake, gasping, "You were going to drug your wife?" Monroe's eyes narrowed, but she didn't speak. She listened. Then I reached into my purse and handed her a USB stick. "I installed a hidden camera in our kitchen 3 weeks ago. Ethan didn't know. That drive has hours of footage." She tilted her head, impressed. "You thought this through." "I thought I was going crazy," I said quietly. "This is how I proved to myself that I wasn't." An hour later, a nurse entered the room. "She's stabilized," she said, "but she ingested a dangerous amount of a compound that isn't in our database. We've sent it to the state lab for analysis." "What compound?" I asked. The nurse hesitated. "Triazepam, at least a modified version of it." I blinked. "That's been banned for years." "Exactly," she said. "This version has a slightly altered structure, enough to avoid flagging standard tests. But it affects liver and kidney function, memory, blood pressure." She paused. "If you drunk that entire cup, we're not sure you'd be here." I sat back in my chair. The walls of the room seemed to shift around me. I stared at my reflection in the glass. I looked fine, but I wasn't. I was anything but fine. That's when I remembered something. "Ethan's college roommate," I said. "Ryan Conley. He works in pharmaceuticals. Research division, private lab up in Durham." Detective Monroe's pen froze mid-word. "You think he supplied the compound?" "He's the only person Ethan ever talked to who had access. He mentioned Ryan owed him a favor." She closed her notebook. "We'll look into him." Then she handed me a small, spiral-bound notepad. "I want you to do something for me, Danielle. Go home. Go through every health scare you've had in the last year. Write it down. Date, time, what you ate, who made it, symptoms, hospital visits, everything." I nodded. It felt like the beginning of an autopsy. That night, I sat at the kitchen table in our home, alone. The house felt colder, like it knew the truth now, too. I opened my laptop. I scrolled back through my calendar, my texts, my food photos. I began building a spreadsheet. February 10th. Tea at Valerie's, nausea, blurred vision, ER visit. March 2nd. Smoothie from Ethan, slept 16 hours straight. March 16th. Cupcakes. Just because, missed client meeting. April 5th. Shared brunch at Valerie's, severe stomach cramps. April 19th. Valerie insisted I try her herbal lemonade, dizziness. April 22nd. Hospitalized, undetectable compound found in bloodstream. Each row felt like a betrayal in black and white. I added a column. Who was present? Ethan, Valerie, Ethan, Valerie, Ethan, and Valerie. Every time. I printed it out, stapled the notebook Detective Monroe gave me on top, and I wrote across the cover, "I am not crazy." The next day, Monroe called. "We found Ryan Conley," she said. "His phone has text messages between him and your husband." I held my breath. She read them slowly. She keeps bouncing back. Might need to up it slightly. This version is cleaner. Won't show up on standard talks. "You sure Valerie is on board? This is your wife we're talking about." My knees buckled. I sank into the couch. She paused. "Danielle, this is bigger than we thought. We're issuing warrants tonight." And I didn't speak. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking, but not from fear, from fury. I never thought a spreadsheet would become a weapon. But as I sat at my kitchen counter, our kitchen counter, with that carefully color-coded document in front of me, I realized it was the most powerful thing I'd created all year. More than any design mock-up, more than any client proposal. This was truth, undeniable, time-stamped, a breadcrumb trail of suffering. Each row was a bullet point in the case I was building. The difference was, I wasn't pitching a project. I was fighting for the right to own my narrative, to prove I hadn't imagined the pain, to prove that someone I loved had been trying to erase me. Slowly, quietly, with intention. The next morning, I walked into Detective Monroe's office with a printed binder labeled Health Incidents, Danielle Carter. It was 64 pages long. She didn't flinch as I handed it over. Cross-referenced dates, what I ate, who prepared it, symptoms, hospitalization notes, missed work days, even timestamps from my Apple Watch, I explained. And I included the name of every doctor I saw and their inconclusive diagnoses. Detective Monroe flipped through the first few pages. "You did half the forensic team's job for them." "I figured it's what Ethan would have done," I said, "if he were the one being targeted." She gave me a long look, then said, "Good instincts." That same afternoon, Monroe called me back in. "Ryan Conley's been arrested," she said, folding her arms as I entered the small interview room. We recovered text messages, between him and Ethan, between him and Valerie. I felt my knees wobble and sat down before she even gestured. "What did they say?" She pulled out a file. "Some of it you've heard, but there's more." She read slowly, each word a match dropped into gasoline. "She keeps bouncing back. Might need to up it slightly. Try something milder next time. Don't want her hospitalized again. Val thinks the sleep formula worked best. Want me to mix more? We just need her out for the Henderson pitch. 1 week max." The room started spinning. "Henderson," I whispered. "Of course, that account. It was the biggest pitch of the quarter. I was lead designer. Valerie's firm was also in the running." Monroe nodded. "We found notes in Valerie's email. She had drafted a full proposal, days before your hospitalization. She even forwarded Ethan a PDF version of your presentation deck." "She had access to that?" I asked. "Ethan did," Monroe said quietly. "He logged into your personal email several times." I pressed my fingers into my temples, trying to hold the pieces of myself together. "They stole my ideas, my clients, my health, one by one." "They tried," she corrected, "but you're still here." Later that day, I returned home with 2 officers to begin collecting more evidence. We pulled hard drives, memory cards, Ethan's locked filing cabinet. His desk drawer contained a leather notebook labeled DC Health Log, Dosages and Effects. It was organized like a science project. Each entry had a date, compound used, quantity, symptom observed, and recovery time. March 16th, cupcakes, 50 musmilligars compound X, vomiting plus dizziness. Result, missed client call, success. April 19th, lemonade. Added blend, B, drowsiness, no memory issues. May require increased dose. May 3, smoothie trial. Subject resisted. Suggest pairing with emotional trigger next time. I dropped the book as if it had burned me. One of the officers picked it up and whistled. "This guy's got a journal like a psych major doing a thesis." "No," I said. "He was just treating me like a lab rat." We also recovered 5 vials of unlabeled clear liquid from a hidden compartment in his briefcase. The lab later confirmed 2 of them matched the compound in Valerie's bloodstream. At that point, Ethan was arrested at his firm. He didn't resist. When Monroe visited him in custody and presented the journal, the footage, and the texts, he said nothing for 20 full minutes. Then finally, it was supposed to be a break, just enough to get her to slow down. Valerie thought it would help. She said Danielle was burning herself out, missing signs. "We didn't mean to hurt her." "Not really. He kept using we." Valerie remained silent during all of this. Still in the hospital, she refused to speak to the detectives. Her lawyer issued a statement saying she had no knowledge of any attempt to harm her sister-in-law, and that any symptoms she experienced were likely the result of unintentional cross-contamination. But then something unexpected happened. Ryan Conley flipped. He agreed to a deal, reduced sentencing in exchange for full cooperation. And he gave everything: emails, lab notes, shipping receipts, supply drop-offs, bank transfers, even an audio recording of a phone call with Ethan and Valerie. "Look, Ryan," Valerie's voice said, "we're not asking for anything lethal, just enough to keep her out of the spotlight. If she misses 1 or 2 presentations, the board will start to wonder. She's moving too fast. The clients love her too much." Ethan chimed in. "We just need 1 break, that's all." 1 week. You said this new mix wouldn't show up on hospital screens. Ryan. I don't know. This isn't legal. You sure she won't press charges? Valerie. She's too proud. Danielle won't want the drama. She'll blame herself before she blames us. Monroe played that clip for me in her office. I blamed myself, I said through gritted teeth, every single time. I stared at the speaker as if it had insulted me personally, but the rage wasn't for the betrayal anymore. It was for how deeply they thought they understood me and how wrong they were. When the media caught wind of the arrests, the story exploded. Prominent Charlotte couple accused of poison plot against interior design exec. Designer's intuition exposes shocking family conspiracy. He spiked her smoothie. She brought him down. I started receiving messages from strangers, from former classmates, from other women who said, I think my partner's been drugging me too. It was horrifying, but also empowering. Because if telling my story helped one person ask the right questions or trust their instincts, then maybe this nightmare had meaning beyond the headlines. One night, as I sat alone in the apartment, Ethan gone, his things removed, the silence no longer heavy, I got an email from Giles and Henson. Danielle, we're reopening the project and would love for you to present again when you're ready. I stared at the screen. Then I smiled. 4 months. That's how long it took to move from arrest to trial. 4 months of discovery motions, depositions, psychological evaluations, and press coverage that painted me alternately as a victim and a vengeful career woman, depending on which tabloid you read. I was called everything, from the wronged wife to the designer who plotted her comeback on the courtroom floor. But I ignored all of it, because I wasn't here to tell the world who I was. I was here to show them. The courtroom was nothing like what you see on television. There were no dramatic gasps or pounding gavels, just cold air, stiff chairs, and the constant scratching of pens on legal pads. But the tension? That was real. It hung over everything like humidity before a hurricane. Ethan sat at the defense table looking thinner, older. He wore a navy suit, the same one he used to wear to quarterly review meetings. Valerie sat beside her own attorney, her usually flawless hair tied in a low, tight bun, her lips drawn into a hard line. She hadn't looked at me once. The prosecution opened with a timeline, my spreadsheet, Exhibit A. They called it a year of poison. Each incident was laid out, projected on a screen for the jury, highlighted in red and yellow to indicate severity. Dates, symptoms, aftermaths, hospital stays, missed meetings, missed life. Then came the footage. The hidden camera in the kitchen. Ethan measuring out powders like he was prepping a latte instead of a slow-acting sedative. He didn't flinch when it played, but the jury did. They gasped when they saw the label. Danielle. Evening Blend. He had named the poison after me. One of the most damning pieces of evidence came on day 4. The prosecutor introduced a leather-bound notebook retrieved from Ethan's office desk. Mr. Carter, she said, turning to face him, can you confirm this is your handwriting? He hesitated. Yes. Could you read entry number 6 aloud, please? His voice was barely audible. April 5th. Valerie prepped herbal drink. Added compound. Result, drowsiness, slurred speech. Danielle missed morning walkthrough. Ethan followed up with client to mitigate damage. Per Valerie. That's one off her plate. The jury sat stone-faced. I could feel their disgust like heat. Valerie's attorney objected, claiming the entry was taken out of context, but the damage had been done. Then came the recording from Ryan Conley. His plea deal required full testimony, and he delivered. In court, Ryan was a wreck. Sweaty, twitchy, clearly overwhelmed, but honest. He described how Ethan had approached him in early February, asking for something that could help someone rest without showing up on a talk screen. At first, he thought it was for insomnia. But then came the recurring requests, the dosage questions, the insistence that it had to be untraceable. And then Valerie got involved. She said Danielle was ruining her firm's future, Ryan testified, that they just needed her out of the picture for a few key pitches. She framed it like a business strategy. I looked over. Valerie's jaw clenched so tightly I thought her molars might crack. When it was my turn to testify, I took a deep breath before walking to the stand. My heels echoed on the tile like a metronome counting down to judgment. The prosecutor smiled softly at me. "Can you tell the court when you first suspected something was wrong?" I answered calmly. It wasn't just one moment. It was a pattern, a slow unraveling. I thought I was stressed, overworked, but my body kept screaming that something was off, and when no one else believed me, I started collecting evidence. She nodded. "What was your relationship with your husband like at that point?" I paused. "Polite? Efficient? Like living with a polite stranger who kept reminding you to drink your smoothie?" The jury chuckled. The tension cracked slightly. "And with your sister-in-law?" I turned toward Valerie. She was calculated, polished, and when I got sick after visiting her, she always had the perfect explanation ready, but never touched the food herself. See, the defense tried to rattle me during cross. They asked why I didn't go to the police earlier, why I didn't confront Ethan, why I chose to install a hidden camera instead of talk to my husband. I answered every question the same way. I wanted proof before I accused someone I loved. In the end, the evidence was irrefutable. Digital logs, video footage, handwritten notes, email threads, lab reports, even fingerprints on the vials. And the final blow? An audio file recovered from Ethan's phone backups. A voice memo he forgot to delete. "Valerie, she's pushing too hard. The Henderson pitch is hers now. We're already out. Ethan, she's killing us. Ethan, she's killing me. I see her less now than when she was in school. Valerie, then make her stop." And when the verdict was read, I felt no joy, just a long, slow exhale I hadn't realized I was holding. Ethan Carter, guilty on 5 counts, including attempted poisoning, unlawful possession of controlled substances, criminal conspiracy, and aggravated assault, sentenced to 15 years without parole. Valerie Langston, guilty on 4 counts, including attempted manslaughter, criminal conspiracy, and obstruction of justice, sentenced to 20 years, parole eligible after 12. Neither of them looked at me as they were led out in handcuffs, but I looked at them, not out of hate, but because I needed them to know, you didn't win. You underestimated the wrong woman. Outside the courtroom, the press swarmed. Microphones, flashes, voices shouting my name, questions flying through the air like bullets. "Danielle, how does it feel to be vindicated? Do you have a message for other victims? Will you ever forgive them?" I said only one thing. I trusted my gut, and it saved my life. Then I walked past the cameras, past the noise, past the headlines, into sunlight. It's been 1 year, 365 days since the verdict was read, since I watched Ethan and Valerie walk out of that courtroom in handcuffs, swallowed by the justice system they never thought would touch them. Since I stood under a brutal North Carolina sun and told the world I had trusted my gut, and it saved my life. A year can pass in a blink or stretch into eternity. For me, it did both. There were days the memories gripped me like a vice, the taste of that bitter coffee, Valerie's convulsing body, Ethan's hollow eyes as he realized his plan had failed. But there were also mornings I woke to birdsong outside my new apartment window and felt peace blooming quietly in my chest. I live in South End now, in a renovated loft with high ceilings, exposed brick, and just enough imperfections to remind me that beauty is in resilience. The place is mine, paid for with my money, built from my hands, designed to reflect who I've become, not who I used to be. My firm promoted me 6 months after the trial, executive design director. It wasn't just a title, it was validation. Not just that I was capable, but that I was trusted. I now lead a team of 12, mentoring young designers who walk into meetings with the same wide eyes I once had. Some days I sit in our sun-drenched conference room, watching them brainstorm over mood boards and floor plans, and I feel a quiet kind of pride that no accolade can touch. And then there are the speeches. The first time I was invited to speak publicly was at a panel on women in high-stakes industries. I almost said no. The idea of being visible again terrified me, but something inside me, the part that survived the poison, the lies, the erasure, stood up. I stood on that stage, lights warm on my face, and began with this. Success is not a staircase. It's a minefield. And sometimes the people you trust most are the ones planting the explosives. The room went still. But if you learn how to listen to your instincts, to your body, to the silence between the words, they can't break you. They can only teach you where never to step again. Afterward, a young woman named Lila approached me in tears. "I think my sister's been drugging me," she whispered, "and no one believes me." We sat in a corner for 30 minutes. I gave her my number, connected her to Detective Monroe, and told her something I wish someone had told me early on. "You're not paranoid. You're paying attention." Giles and Henson renewed their contract with our firm for 5 years. That client Ethan and Valerie tried to sabotage me over. He personally called to tell me he was glad I was still standing, that he respected how I handled the chaos with dignity and strength. I didn't cry when I hung up. I just stared at the city skyline outside my window and let the wind sink into my bones. I started painting again. Small canvases, mostly abstract, deep strokes of color, texture, mess, healing. I don't paint for anyone else now, just me. On weekends, I take long walks with my dog Milo. He's a rescue, like me. We both came from something that tried to destroy us. And now we roam freely. I talk to him more than I probably should. "You know, Milo," I said once, tossing him a treat, "some people use poison. Others use love like a weapon. Either way, they both aim for the same thing, control." He tilted his head like he understood. People often ask me if I've forgiven them. It's not a simple question. Forgiveness isn't something you hand out like candy. It's not owed, it's earned. And neither Ethan nor Valerie ever tried to earn it. They both filed appeals. They both lost. They're still serving time in separate facilities. Valerie reached out once. A letter. She wrote, "I was wrong. I let ambition turn me into someone I don't recognize. You didn't deserve it. You were never my competition. You were just better." And I hated that. I never wrote back. Some things don't need closure. Sometimes silence is the full stop. A few months ago, I met someone. Not romantically. Not yet. I'm not ready. But his name is Marcus, and he's kind, smart, funny, in that dry, sarcastic way that sneaks up on you. He teaches art therapy at a local center for trauma survivors. We met at a networking event. I made a joke about color palettes, and he called me out on mixing cool tones with warm. We've been talking ever since. He knows everything, and he doesn't flinch when I double-check my drinks. He doesn't tease me when I eat from my own plate at restaurants. He gets it. The other night, he said something that stuck with me. "You're not broken, Danielle. You're just battle-tested." And maybe he's right. Next month, I'll be giving the keynote speech at the National Women in Design Leadership Conference in Chicago. My topic? Blueprints for Survival, Rebuilding After They Try to Erase You. I already know how I'll end it. They thought the poison would dim my light, but all it did was teach me how to shine through smoke. And when I step off that stage into a room of women who've been silenced, dismissed, underestimated, I won't be just a survivor. I'll be a lighthouse. Because the best revenge isn't rage, it's radiance. It's standing tall with scars that glint like armor. It's success served not cold, but clean, earned, and undeniable. It's walking through fire and realizing you're flame-proof now.